we will hear from Nori Muster on her talk, Treating Cultic Abuse with Art Therapy. Nori Muster, MS, is the author of Betrayal of the Spirit, My Life Behind the Headlines of the Hare Krishna Movement, Cult Survivor's Handbook, 7 Paths to the Authentic Life, and Child of the Cult. She was an ISKCON member from 1978 to 1988, then earned her Master of Science degree at Western Oregon University in 1991, doing art therapy with juvenile sex offenders. She's currently a freelance writer and adjunct professor based in Arizona. Her website for Cultic Studies information is norimuster.com/writing/Cultic Studies. With that being said, I'll turn the time over to you, Nori. Thank you so much for being here today.
Okay, I wanted to start, first of all, since this is about art therapy and creative art therapy, I want everyone to grab some art materials. So you can use, I brought some examples. There's some oil pastels, or you can use colored pencils, watercolor. You can use clay, paints, colored pens. Run and get something while I'm talking. I'll talk loud. You can use regular colored pens or black pen, chalk pastels or chalk. You can use collage, just pictures you might have collected. And you can draw on plain paper, or if you have a sketch pad, use that. And if you have crayons, those are great for bringing up childhood issues. So if you're going to draw, you don't have to, don't feel like you have to, but if you're going to draw something or make something, I want to give you an assignment. You can do anything you want, but if you want an assignment, I'd like you to talk about or to make an art piece based on something good about your current life outside of the cult. And if you feel like your life isn't that great out of the cult yet, then I want you to draw something to picture how you want your life to be, something you want to add to your life, or something you want to develop within yourself that will make your life better. Next, I want to share, first of all, I did, my master's degree was on art, using art therapy with juvenile delinquents. So I'm going to share some of the drawings that my juvenile delinquents did. So this is a page at my website, norimuster.com. This is my thesis. I posted the whole thing there. And here is, I'm going to screen share the juvenile art therapy. So they did a lot of artwork when I was working at the Hillcrest Juvenile Hall. It wasn't called a juvenile hall, it was called a reform school. Then it was called a juvenile correctional institution, now it's closed. But anyway, this is just some of the work I did with the kids. This is a house tree person drawing. A house tree person is one of the most commonly studied aspects of art therapy, where they've collected statistics on different kinds of groups of people, different populations. So there's a few things you can look for in a house tree person drawing. For example, look at the tree he drew. It's got spiky branches that look like, the foliage has been trimmed off or topped off. And so if someone uses that, it often signifies anger or unrest within the person. Then look at the house. You can see windows in the house, which is a good sign, and a door, and the house looks pretty normal, so that's a good sign. And also he put a horizon line in where the ground is. Not a horizon line, but he outlined where the ground is, which is a good thing. And then you can see the person that he drew. He's facing toward the house, but he's a little too big to get in the door. So that's another thing they look for. Here's another art therapy piece. This piece was, the assignment was to draw your life path. So this student had drawn a sort of a winding path with obstacles all along the way. And the writing on it says, born, hospital, learn to walk, learn to talk, dad goes to jail. First grade, second grade, third grade, dad gets out of jail. Dad's drinking again, abuse, start getting into trouble. Fifth, sixth, more trouble with the law, first offense, second offense, get locked up, stuck in a hole. Anyway, a hole, that's how he wrote it. Here's another life path drawing. And he said that what he wrote on it, born in hospital in Oregon, go to foster home, age 12, go to another foster home, too bad, age 12. The home was a bad place. Go to another foster home, age 12, go to the name of the Hillcrest Juvenile Correctional Institution, hit the kid. So he apparently felt bad he hit a child. Okay, this is another drawing. The first drawing this student drew for me was of a rose that had been cut off, freshly cut, and it had like a drip coming out of the bottom. And he drew this image a few times. I don't happen to have a copy of it on my webpage, but he said, I asked him what the rose meant to him. And he said that he had been removed from his home at age 14 and that he felt cut off. But then after working together I worked at the correctional institution for a year, and he eventually drew this image that was a lot more positive. Here's another student. This was one of my most prolific students. He started off with this image, blood in the water, a battleship, a lightning storm. And then at the end of therapy, he drew this, which is a lot more positive. Still got a battleship, but he wanted some of the children, I would give them art materials and a sketchbook to take, that they could keep in their rooms. So he asked me for some art materials. So he drew this image over and over and over. He filled up a whole sketchbook with these. Most of them were in black and white. He was one of my success stories. Here's another drawing from Hillcrest where they were supposed to write the two sides of themselves. So the wording there says, after, I'm in a good mood. And then the other side says, me when staff wake me up. That's when he's in a bad mood. Here's another one about the two sides of yourself. One says, don't worry, be happy. And then the other side says, don't worry, I haven't killed no one yet. Here's another one of my students. I asked them to draw something about how they pictured themselves in the future, and he pictured himself in jail. Here's another one. In my form of art therapy that I learned, it's called Gestalt Art Therapy. And my teacher said not to look for sexual images because if they're there, you'll see them. So this is obviously a statement about either his abuse or someone who abused him. Now, we're going to talk about cult kids next. I'm not going to show any of their artwork because I just, I don't want to, I don't have their permission to show it, but this was all done like 30 years ago when I was in grad school. The staff at the correctional institution didn't want the children to draw guns or knives or skull and crossbones or anything that seemed violent, but I always let them do it anyway. So this is a drawing of a gun. There's another drawing of a gun, and he labeled it a gun. Here's another drawing of a gun where the student was explaining how he had witnessed a man get shot in half. Here's another, this is another drawing about what might happen to, what the student pictured happening to him in the future. And he always thought he'd probably get killed in a gunfight with a policeman. And you can see from how the policeman's body is sort of turning away from him, like he doesn't want to be involved, but that's another drawing. This is a drawing that the student told me was him stabbing the staff with a knife, and you can see where he's stabbing the staff and how little he is, but how big his hands are. And as soon as he drew it, he knew he shouldn't have drawn it, so he crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. And I plucked it out of the trash and unfolded it and smoothed it out and told him I thought it was a fine drawing. Here's another drawing of a weapon. And the thing he's holding in his hand there is a belt showing he won the fight. And you can see these little logos he made for himself up there: hate and pain, sad and hurt. On the opposite side, he drew this picture of his father hitting him. And you can see he has no hands. These are the kind of things that you notice in people's artwork. So now stop screen share. Okay. So next we're going to talk about abuse in cults, because there's specific kinds of abuse that often take place in cults. And it's usually systemic, which means that it's not just between two people. It's basically throughout, kind of permeates the whole system. So there's emotional, spiritual, financial, physical, and sexual abuse. And those are the most common types of abuse. And cults may also exhibit racism, misogyny, and negative attitudes toward children and toward the outside world. So we're going to recognize the concerns of those born or raised in groups. I kind of separate people who joined as adults and people who were raised in a group. So people who are raised in a group, they have no choice. They had no choice on whether to join a cult. And they often leave in their teens or 20s. And when they leave, they may lose contact with their families who shun them. And they may leave with developmental deficits, and they may have been abused in the cult, so they leave with abuse issues. And due to the way the cult raised them and taught them about the outside world, they may have a distorted vision of what's out there. They may feel caught between the two worlds. They can't fit in with the cult anymore, and they may feel like they don't fit in the outside world. And usually it's usually a long road to recovery, and it helps a lot if they can get education, counseling, and if they have a strong support system. And okay, now we're going to recognize the concerns of people who joined cults as adults. That's what I did. I joined right after college. So cults may turn their followers against their former friends and family. You have to completely let go of your family and friend relationships. They may ask you to give up your personal belongings, including your bank accounts and any kind of other things you own. They may ask you to quit your job and move in full-time and work as a volunteer for the group, or give you a stipend. So full-time volunteer. Some cults, some more modern cults or intergenerational cults may make their members, they can live outside the group, but they still feel isolated from the world around them. And nowadays, a lot of cults are on the internet. So people, may not live in a certain place, but every day they get up and they go into that website to see what's new and see their friends there in social media. Cults may shun or harass people who leave. People who exit a cult may go back to a profession they had before, or they may go back into school, which is what I did, start a new life. And some people get over it right away. They just get out, get back with their life, and they're fine. Other people can struggle for decades to really find their place in the world after leaving a cult. So the next thing we're going to talk about is to identify strategies for how to use artwork to reach out to people who have exited their cult. So the process for a trauma victim to heal is to begin to be able to tell their story to an empathetic listener. If a victim, a trauma victim, can fully tell their story to someone who won't judge them or try to tell them to forgive or cut them off in another way, if they can fully tell their story and they feel heard, then they're validated and that what happened to them was wrong and that they can recover from it, and then they begin their recovery. So instead of the one problem with telling people to forgiveness is good. And there's a time for forgiveness when you get to it. Usually it may take a while really for a victim to get to where they can forgive. So there's no reason to push them to get there. Just help them to get there on their own time. Because if you, like some counselors may say, oh, forgiveness is magical. You just have to forgive someone and you're going to be fine. But that really just stops them. It can freeze them in their recovery where they feel like they're not, is that all there is? Okay, it's done. So they'll just stop trying to explain or understand what happened to them. So next, I want to share a couple books I have collected for you to show you. Since this is like, not in person, I just thought it would be good to have a little show and tell. I want to share some of my textbooks from graduate school when I was studying child abuse and art. So this is one of the best books here. It's Virginia Axline Play Therapy. This book was originally written in 1947. Virginia Axline lived from 1911 to 1988. And this is the seminal book on art, on play therapy. And she worked with children. And she was a humanist, and her method of working with children was pretty revolutionary in its time in the 1940s, where she would just put the toys. She had a workroom, a counseling room with toys, and she would bring the children in and let them just play with the toys and see what they did. And then she wouldn't try to direct them or force them into any kind of program. She would just let them find a toy and play with it and talk to her. And then she would kind of listen to them and, just help them with their problems, but not just more like a regular talk therapy counselor would do, where you don't guide the person like, well, what did you do last week? Tell me how you work things out with that friend. They just let the client direct everything. And so that was a really helpful book. And this is the standard for all modern art therapy and play therapy. This is another author I studied. This is Alice Miller. She's gone now. She lived from 1923 to 2010. This book was written in 1991, so it was brand new when I was doing my thesis. But Alice Miller she writes in German, and she's one of the most important authors, one of the people who's really written the truths about child abuse. I really like her. This is another one of her books. This one was written in 1986. So this was one of my art teachers. My college where I got my degree didn't have an art therapy course, but there was a nearby college just 50 miles north of where I lived. I lived in Salem, Oregon, and there was another college near Portland in West Lynn, Oregon, where they had an art therapy degree, and they had open classes through Merrillhurst College Extension. So I could take art therapy workshops there. So I was up there all the time taking art therapy. And this was my main teacher that I just loved. And this is Janie Ryan. She wrote this book in 1984. She lived from 1913 to 1995. And she invented Gestalt Art Therapy. The first kind of art therapy that came around was earlier in the century, and it was Freudian art therapy, because Freud was into images and imagination and dreams and art and things like that, that he believed could express the psyche, the subconscious. So he was open to art therapy. He had a lot of misconceptions though, like he believed that all humans had the same psychic disorder, and that was our guilt over unfulfilled sexual fantasies. So, you know, later on that Carl Jung helped change that. Sorry if I'm triggering anyone with Jung, because he's sometimes, people have a cult based on Carl Jung. But anyways, Janie Ryan believed that she was the first. Gestalt art therapy was one of the first non-directive ways to use artwork. And she said, don't try to push people. She calls it the Gestalt art therapy experience, because she believed that most of the healing was in the process. So while you were making the artwork, and then when you look at the artwork, you know, what it brings up for you, that's the important part, not what the therapist says about it. So Gestalt art therapy, Gestalt itself is like the Zen or the Tao. And I hope I'm not triggering anyone that was in an Eastern religious cult, but just for a second, I'm going to talk about the Tao and the Zen. Gestalt therapy is known to be like the Tao, like you can't really explain what it is, because if you explain it, then it's not the real thing. So the person who brought Gestalt to America was Fritz Pearls. This is his book, Gestalt Therapy Verbatim. He wrote this in 1969. He lived from 1893 to 1970. And Gestalt therapy was a thing already in Germany, but he brought it to the US. And this is one of his this is one of his students, Barry Stevens. And she's one of my favorite authors. She has a couple of books. This is her most famous book. It's called Don't Push the River, It Flows by Itself. She wrote this in 1969, and it's her diary from sitting in a workshop with Fritz Pearls in British Columbia. Barry Stevens lived from 1902 to 1985. So these are all the founding, early founding people of the Gestalt art therapy. And her book, the thing is with Gestalt, just like with Zen and the Tao, you can't explain what it is, because then you wouldn't be really describing it. So her book is really one of the best to understand Gestalt therapy, because she writes about her activities during the workshop. So I'm going to read a few quotes from her. She says, "Sometimes I prefer Zen, even if it does take 20 years. I'm not sure that Gestalt doesn't take 20 years to reach the same place." And then she wrote, these are all quotes from her book. What is Gestalt? When I didn't know, I couldn't tell you. And now that I know, I can't tell you." And then I think this last quote is really the most telling one. And that is, "I've just finished doing the dishes. I didn't do them, they did themselves with me. And I enjoyed the water, the suds, the plates, and the pots." So when we talk about our artwork, and after this session, this pre-recorded session, we'll talk about that. The next thing I want to talk about is how art therapy works to bridge the nonverbal feelings into words. So usually as adults, we can go into the counselor and start in like, oh yeah, well this week I had this, and since I saw you, I really worked on my issues with that, and so on. Adults can usually pretty much verbalize what's on their mind when they sit down with their counselor. However, trauma patients and young, people like juveniles or children or people who leave traumatized children or adult trauma victims can't always get in touch with their feelings to speak about them. So artwork helps do that. Because when we have feelings, they're usually not words. Like we're not thinking, oh, that big dog I saw scared me so much, or, it's just, you visualize it like, oh, that dog, that image keeps coming back. And, so artwork actually works more like the brain works. It's images, you express feelings, and then you look at it and you go, oh, I see something in this. And then you can talk about it. So that's how it works. And that's why I used it with the juveniles, because they basically wanted the kids at Hillcrest to their form of therapy they use, which I really disagreed with, and I got in trouble for it. But they use a kind of therapy with sex offenders called fessing up, where they sit the perpetrators down in a circle in the correctional institution, and then they go around the circle, and each person says their name, what their offense was that put them in jail or in custody, and who they offended. So it makes them really uncomfortable. Like, my name is Jim, and I raped my little sister, and it's just like really a bad way to approach it. But the staff my supervisors let me be an art teacher, and I would get the kids to talk about their experiences that way. And I developed what was called the 4-phase treatment design. With the first phase was to build trust. The second phase was to talk about their abuse issues, how they were abused. The third phase was to talk about their perpetrator issues and why they, how they perpetrated abuse on others, and get them to talk about it. And then the fourth phase was just closing and, letting, if they had to leave the group, then they left the group. One thing I really want to emphasize with art therapy, modern art therapy, is to not overanalyze things and to have fun with it, because it's an experiential type of therapy. And the staff at Hillcrest they would get on my case like, oh, you're just sitting there doing artwork with these kids. What does that do? And so that was why I made my 4-phase treatment design. And it's, you're just trying to have fun, well, how can you make any progress if you're just sitting there having fun drawing? But that's the point, is art therapy should be fun, and help people open up to talk about their issues in a way that's where you can trust the therapist or the art teacher, and where the person going through the experience is having a good experience. So that's my presentation. I'll just share a couple more things with you. I have here just some publications I did. When I was a Hare Krishna, I worked on this newspaper called ISKCON World Review. We put out 80 issues of it. A lot of them were black and white. We'd also do 2-color. Here's one with a little orange in it. After leaving, I wrote this book. This is my memoir, Betrayal of the Spirit. This is my friend. He's not with us anymore, but it's a great picture of him lying down on the floor, bowing on the floor of the Laguna Beach Temple. And it tells my story and also the story of the Hare Krishnas. Here's another book that I just love. I didn't write this one, but it came out while I was still a devotee living in the temple, Monkey on a Stick by John Huebner. And he's a dear friend. He helped me with my book. And I saw him last time I went on an airplane in 2019. But Monkey on a Stick covers basically the same ground as my book, but it's told from the viewpoint of a journalist instead of an insider. I also wrote this book, Cult Survivor's Handbook, which is everything I learned in grad school on how to recover. I wrote this book, Child of the Cult, which is the stories of 5 people who grew up in different cults. And then this book, Dreaming Peace, it's more for people that don't have trauma, unresolved issues. It's more of a positive psychology book, but it's on how to make your life better and how to help society get better. So that's the presentation. And if you want to find me, I'm in ICSA and I'm also at norimuster.com. So you can always go there and look at my stuff there. And now we're going to talk about your questions and your artwork. So that's it for now.